The war between Israel and Iran just went in a new direction. The US recently sent one of its most powerful aircraft carriers to the Middle East because of worries of a regional war. But that's not all. In order to restore peace around the world, the USAF has shown off a truly amazing piece of technology. An airborne aircraft carrier that works very differently from normal naval ships. How is this new aircraft carrier different from the others? What skills does it have that make it more dangerous? Let's look at the features and capabilities of the US's brand new UFO aircraft carrier, which is now ready to go. The US Navy launched the USS Langley 100 years ago. It was a one-of-a-kind ship that would forever change military flight. These are huge ships that can hold up to 90 planes and have up to 5,000 soldiers working on them. These air bases that float are over 1,000 feet long and can spread military power almost anywhere in the world. Now though, things are more complicated because the US Air Force has shown off a UFO aircraft carrier. The US Navy tried flying aircraft carriers in the 1930s. These were stiff airships called the USS Akron and USS Macon. Large dirigibles, like these, carried small F-9C2 Curtiss Sparrowhawk biplanes that could be launched and retrieved in the air using a rope system. The US Navy used stiff airships called the USS Akron and USS Macon in the sky. These Akron-class dirigibles were built starting in 1929. They had a three-keel design that made them stronger than the first German Zeppelins. There were 8 powerful 560 horsepower Maybach VL2 engines inside, which made upkeep easier and cut down on drag while in flight. But the blades stayed outside the plane and could be tilted down to make takeoffs and landings smoother. There was more to them than just airships. They were using aircraft carriers that were made for spying and reconnaissance flights. The F-9C2 Curtiss Sparrowhawk and other small planes were meant to fit on these huge dirigibles, which could be sent into the air and picked up in the same moment. The airship could keep an eye on enemies from farther away or fight enemies if necessary, and only 8 of these mini biplanes were made. They were armed with 30-inch machine guns. ASA, the Sparrowhawks flew over the US coastline. The Akron and Macon were meant to be the ship's eyes. They were to spot any threats trying to enter American airspace or enemy ships going too close to the shore. These airships could keep an eye on more areas than the naval force could. Their goal was clear: patrolling the coast will help protect the home country. The Akron had a hangar deck with a hole in the shape of an AT that was 75 feet long and 60 feet wide. This is where the Sparrowhawks were launched and picked up. According to the National Air and Space Museum, the planes were hung from the airship on something that looked like a trapeze. It took a very skilled pilot to move the plane's hook under the trapeze so that it could be recovered. To link with the horizontal bar of the trapeze, the pilot had to carefully move the plane. Once it was hooked, the engine was turned off, and the plane was lifted into the airship's belly and put away on its own racks. Even though it had a unique design, the Akron had a number of fatal crashes during its short time in service. In 1932, 2 sailors died in an accident while mooring, and another person died in an accident near a hangar. The Akron and Macon seemed like great new ideas at the time. The Navy knew that these airships should stay behind the lines and let their spy planes check out the coast. If they had flown ahead, it would have been easy for enemy planes to attack them. Even though it was dangerous, the Akron-class aircraft did something amazing by being able to launch and retrieve planes in the air. The wreck of the Akron is now at the bottom of the water, close to Atlantic City. That didn't mean the end of flying aircraft carriers, though. They were still used after the 1900s. The US has only recently started to look into a new flying carrier program. One example is the C-130 Hercules. This is an American military transport plane called the Lockheed C-130 Hercules. It has 4 Lockheed turboprop engines. It was made to carry troops, medical patients, and cargo, and it can take off and rest on rough runways. The C-130 has been changed over time to do many different things, such as search and rescue and airborne attacks with guns. Help with science, keeping an eye on the weather, refueling in the air, marine patrol, and fighting fires from the air. Many armed forces around the world use it as their main tactical transport plane. There are more than 40 different models, including civilian versions called the Lockheed Lone 100, that are used in more than 60 countries. In 1956, the US was the first country to use this passenger plane. Soon after, Australia and other countries followed suit. In the past, it has taken part in many military, civilian, and humanitarian tasks. In 2007, it became the 5th plane to have served its first customer, the U.S. Air Force. For 50 years, IT has been made for longer than any other military airplane. As of 2023, the newest model, the Lockheed Martin C-130J Super Hercules, was still being made. The U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, has been around since 2015, has been looking into the possibility of using a modified Lockheed C-130 Hercules cargo plane to launch and help Dynetics X-61 Gremlin's unmanned aerial vehicles fight. When their tasks are over, these microfighters are brought back to base using a special air recovery method that involves a drogue-like receptacle and a docking technique. At the moment, tests are being done at Dugway Proving Ground, and a hired C-130A is being provided by International Air Response. During one of these tests in January 2023, DARPA was able to launch an X-61 Gremlin UAV from the C-130's bay. If the test goes well and the aircraft carrier is launched, the U.S. would be able to launch drones from ships while still being outside of enemy air defenses. The drones would then be able to attack targets before returning to the airspace around the mothership to be captured and taken home for maintenance or repairs. There are some bad things that happened during the tests, though. One test showed that the drone could be launched by the Cone 130, but after an hour and a half of flight, its parachute would fail, killing it. But that's probably a simple fix that would keep that from happening in future runs. After that setback was over, the program could go ahead as planned. This would help other projects like it grow, and in the end, the US would have the power of a supercarrier in the sky. In the 1970S, the US Air Force tried out the idea of turning one of its big planes into a flying aircraft carrier full of fighters that could be sent out into battle and even picked up in midair. This would add to the already strong fleet of aircraft carriers. The Lockheed C-5 Galaxy and the Boeing 747 were both in the running for this job. Boeing got the most votes when they correctly said in their plan that the 747 had better range and endurance when carrying an impressive 883,000 pounds of cargo. Because of this, the 747 could hold up to 10 microfighters at once. He designed and built the microfighters to be small enough to fit inside the 747. He also made a system that would let the big plane take the fighters over long distances and drop them off where they were needed to fight. Get them back and, if necessary, give them more fuel. The Boeing microfighters were meant to fight advanced threats, but there was some doubt about their range and how well they would do against them. The plan never made it past the first page of Boeing's report, but it did show that, despite the problems, the idea was technically possible, even if it would have been expensive. It was followed by the Lockheed CL-12/1. The goal of this project was to build a huge nuclear-powered airplane with wings that were 1,120 feet long. It would have been the biggest airplane ever, with wings that were more than twice as long as any plane from the 20th century if it had been built. Stay true to their style of pushing the limits, Lockheed chose to try flying planes the size of a normal aircraft carrier. This plane, or aircraft carrier, is 5,265 tons heavy, which is a record. It's as tall as a 14-story house. The plan called for wings that were 1,120 feet long and a fuselage that was 560 feet long so that such a huge structure could fly. From end to end, that's how long 2.5 Boeing 747s are. Interesting aside, this aircraft carrier could surprisingly be powered by just 4 huge turbofan engines running on normal jet fuel up to an altitude of less than 16,000 feet at this point. The jet starts running on nuclear power from a reactor on board, and it stays that way for 41 days without having to refuel or land anything. During this time, the plane could cruise at a speed of Mach 0.8 and fly about 30,000 feet above the ground. There would be 845 people working on this huge plane, which could carry 2,020 multi-role fighters and have a hangar bay for repairs. However, it would probably cost billions of dollars and a lot of labor hours to build and keep up, which is probably one reason why it never made it past the proposal stage. But the idea behind it is still a strange event in history that gets new attention from around the world. The B-36 Peacemaker strategic bomber was another plane that was supposed to be changed so that it could carry microfighters. There were plans for it in the 1950s to be a flying aircraft carrier that could hold up to 4 McDonnell F-85 Goblin fighter planes. That big of a bomber was the Convair BE-36 Peacemaker. From 1946 to 1959, it was used by the U.S. Air Force. It is the biggest mass-produced plane with piston engines, and it was made by Convair. Both the span and weight of a single Hughes Hercules were bigger, but the B-36 has the longest wingspan of any battle plane and can fly across continents without stopping to refuel. The B-36 went into service in 1948 and was the main plane used by the Strategic Air Command to carry nuclear weapons. It was used until 1955, when the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress took its place. Only 4 B-36s are left, after most of them were thrown away. It was being worked on before the U.S. joined World War, because the country needed a fighter that could fly to Europe and come back to North America. When the bomber was first asked for, it had to have a range of 12,000 miles, a top speed of 450 mph, and an average speed of 275 miles per hour. These specs were too high-tech for the time, but they were later changed to include a range of 10,000 miles, a battle radius of 4,000 miles, a cruising speed of 240 to 300 miles per hour, and a service ceiling of 40,000 feet. The changes were meant to make the bomber more successful against Nazi Germany's anti-aircraft defenses. This is where the U.S. The B-36 was the most important plane for the Army Air Forces because it could fly from Hawaii to Japan. After seeing German plans for a similar bomber, and while the German Hinkel Company began working on their own 6-engine bomber on July 23, 1943, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson and other high-ranking officers chose to skip the normal steps for getting weapons for the military. As soon as the prototypes were done testing, the USAF quickly placed an order with Convair for 100 B-36 bombers. The last plane would arrive in October 1945, after the first one arrived in August 1945. But the arrival was late. The B-36 saw its first flight in August 1946, after being shown off in August 1945. At the start of the Cold War, the U.S. military wanted bombers that could carry big atomic bombs. The B-36 was the only American plane that could carry these bombs from the U.S. to the USSR, because it had the range and space to do so. It could carry bigger bombs because of a special change called the Grand Slam system. However, the B-36 quickly became obsolete when faster jet fighters came out. The jet-powered B-47 Stratojet, which was similar, didn't start flying fully until 1953, and it needed to be refueled in the air to get to the Soviet Union. Both the B-29 and B-50 bombers had a short range. It wasn't until 1955 when the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress was ready. The B-36 was no longer the main nuclear bomber for the Strategic Air Command. The B-36 was called the Aluminum Overcast, and it was a key part of SAC while General Curtis LeMay was in charge. It could take more than the B-29 or B-52, go on missions up to 3,400 miles away, and stay in the air for up to 4 hours. It could fly very high because it had big wings and 6 engines. To fire its microfighters, the McDonnell F-85. Goblin would be able to avoid most enemy fighters and anti-aircraft guns. It could hold up to 4 of them. Back in the 1950s, the B-36 was the best choice because it was so big and heavy. With wings that are 230 feet long, the B-36 is one of the biggest planes ever made. Its wings are even bigger than those of the B-52 Stratofortress. It's pretty crazy how heavy it is, 410,000 pounds with fuel and up to 86,000 pounds of weapons on board. Even with all of these bragging rights, the B-36 would never be used in combat. The goal was to give the US the ability to bomb Berlin quickly. But by the time it was ready, World War II was over. But because it was so big and could go so far, the Air Force thought about using it as a flying aircraft carrier. However, that plan also did not come true because mid-air refueling greatly improved the range of all types of aircraft, making the B-36 Peacemaker's range less important in the end. But since making an aircraft carrier didn't seem like it would work, the focus has been on making the US Navy stronger and thanks to advances in technology, this area has made great strides. The USS Gerald is proof of this change in technology. There are no other aircraft carriers bigger than the USS Gerald R. Ford class, which can carry up to 100,000 tons. The U.S. Northrop Grumman was hired by the Navy in 2008 with a $5 billion deal to design and build an aircraft carrier. The USS Gerald R. Ford made a big splash around the world when it was launched in 2009. And it's not just because it's a new type of aircraft carrier, but because it was built to make the U.S. Navy stronger. Anyone who knows anything about the U.S. military would know that the country takes its defense systems very seriously. They wanted the aircraft carrier to be perfect, no matter how much they spent making it. And yes, the ship is beautiful, just the way you think it. Is.ET was designed and made by Huntington Ingalls Industries, which is one of the best companies. Which company is the only one in the U.S. that builds nuclear ships? The 2 nuclear reactors on this aircraft carrier make it a nuclear ship. Each one weighs more than 1,000 tons. The people who made the game say that they let the ship work for a very long time. This plane would be able to fly for more than 50 years. This is one of the most powerful aircraft carriers in the world because of these things. The USS Gerald Ford has 2 brand new Bechtel A1B nuclear reactors that power it. When it comes to engines, military ships have the best ones. Because of these reactors, the ship can go 25 years without having to refuel, and it will only need 1 refueling in its whole 50-year life. It can quickly get to any part of the world, ready to help friends or fight enemies, with a top speed of about 30 knots. The USS Ford has sensors, computers, and weapon systems that are at the cutting edge of technology. It has the AN/SPY-3 radar, which is different from most carriers because it combines horizon and volume search powers into a single advanced system. This radar can do a lot of different things, from keeping an eye on things and controlling air traffic, to communicating with missiles and finding targets far away. Dual-band radar is the name of the radar that Raytheon made for both the Zumwalt-class destroyers and the Gerald ER. Ford-class aircraft carriers. The control tower can be smaller if there is only 1 radar with 6 sides instead of 6 to 10 different ones. 2 kinds of radar are used together in the DBR, the X-band N/SPY-3 for multipurpose and the S-band N/SPY-4 for volume search. There are 3 groups of these radars, and each group can scan a different area at the same time. In the end, to save money, the S-band radar was taken off the Zumwalt-class destroyers. The 3 sides of the radar that use the X-band send out radar signals and track things that are moving low. The other 3 sides, which use the S-band, look for and track targets in all kinds of weather. It is the first radar system to work on 2 different frequencies at the same time. And it is all managed by a single system. This ship has room for up to 75 attack jets and unmanned aerial vehicles. This 5th generation jet, which includes the very advanced F-35C Lightning II Joint Strike Fighter, is the result of the Pentagon's most expensive weapons program, which cost around $400 billion. The Navy prefers it because it can do a lot of different things, like close air support, vertical takeoff and landing, and more. Also, the USS Ford is ready for the future because it has everything it needs to host, launch, and recover the next wave of planes, such as the F/A XX fighter from the 6th series. Thanks for seeing. Click on the link that shows up on your screen to watch one of our other videos. Enjoy your stay here. See you then.